Today we're going to read a poem by Theodore Roethke, a very, very famous American poet, who surprisingly has written a poem that sounds silly. And we're going to decide what kind of poem it is, what kind of poem we think it is. There's no right or wrong. Okay, so the title, The Serpent. What is a serpent? A serpent is maybe an older word for a snake. But why doesn't the poet use the word snake? What is he suggesting? If we use a much older word for a snake, what do we expect to associate with maybe a biblical snake? What did the snake do in the Bible? It had a very important role. So think of all of those associations first before we start reading. If we think of a very old, wise snake, we're going to look at some difficult words first so that we can get the most advantage out of reading the poem. The poet also uses this word serpenting. Does such a word exist, or did the poet make it up? What does it mean to serpent? Is he being silly? He's turned that word into a verb. So there's that to think about. There's this word propounded. So our book tells us to put forward an idea strongly. That's a good way of explaining something. When you feel very confident about something and you want to communicate it in a confident way, you propound it. What is a racket? The serpent was making an awful racket, a very loud noise. Although don't forget that birds are often described as making a racket as well. If people are bothered by the noise of birds, they also use the word racket sometimes. So the birds brought him a drum. He wouldn't whack it. What is whack? Whack is another word for to hit a drum, to smack it, to make a loud noise. And then they're talking about musical instruments, and they try to give him a tuba, which is like a wind instrument, like a sort of trumpet family. Commodious, what is commodious? The book describes it as large, but I think it's better to describe it as roomy or comfortable, okay? If you have a beautiful place to sit in the sun, which has lots of space, then it's commodious, okay? It makes you comfortable and cozy. A horn is another wind instrument. A flute is another wind instrument, musical instruments. Then they accuse the snake of leering, okay? So here we're getting into his sneaky, naughty nature. To leer at something is to reveal, what does the dictionary say? Yes. To look or gaze in a lascivious way or an unpleasant way. So here we're coming to his darker side. And lascivious also has this sexual suggestion as well. So, what other words do we have? Shriek. What is another synonym for shriek? To shout in a loud, high-pitched way. Okay, so can you notice that there's a lot of vocabulary to do with sound, which is important because poetry is all about sound. So we're going to read the poem without worrying too much about deeper meanings at first. We're going to listen to the sound. And remember, the meaning of the poem is often the poem itself. Is that a silly thing to say? I don't think so. You've got to trust yourself when you read a poem. And don't expect to understand it all at once, like even today. Okay? Let's start reading. Just listen to the sound. There was a serpent who had to sing. There was. He simply gave up serpenting because because he didn't like his kind of life. He couldn't find a proper wife. He was a serpent with a soul. He got no pleasure down his hole. And so, of course, he had to sing. And sing he did, like anything. The birds, they were astounded, and various measures propounded to stop the serpent's awful racket. They bought a drum, he wouldn't whack it. They sent, you always send, to Cuba, and got a most commodious tuba. They got a horn, they got a flute, but nothing would suit. He said, "Look, birds, all of this is futile. I do not like to bang or tootle." And then he cut loose with a horrible note that practically split the top of his throat. "You see," he said with a serpent's leer, "I'm serious about my singing career." And the woods resounded with many a shriek as the birds flew off to the end of the week, to the end of next week. Sorry. Okay,